I still remember the day we moved into our dream home. After years of saving, pinching pennies, and working overtime shifts, my spouse and I finally had enough for a down payment on a beautiful two-story colonial in Oak Ridge Estates. The neighborhood was everything we had hoped for. Mature oak trees lining the streets, well-maintained lawns, and neighbors who waved as you drove past. Our realtor had mentioned there was an HOA, but assured us they were reasonable and mainly focused on maintaining property values. "Nothing to worry about," she said with a smile. If only I had known what was coming. We spent the first few months settling in, painting walls, replacing outdated fixtures, and making the house truly ours. I had always been environmentally conscious, bringing reusable bags to the grocery store and composting our food waste, but owning a home gave me the opportunity to make a bigger impact. After researching renewable energy options, I decided to invest in solar panels. They were not cheap, nearly $20,000 even after tax incentives. But I calculated they would pay for themselves within 7 years while significantly reducing our carbon footprint. The installation process went smoothly. The company handled all the permits and even helped me navigate the HOA approval process. The existing board reviewed my application and approved it quickly, noting that my design complied with all aesthetic guidelines. Within a week, sleek black panels adorned our south-facing roof, barely visible from the street but perfectly positioned to capture maximum sunlight. I felt a surge of pride every time I checked our electric meter, watching it spin backward on sunny days as we fed power back into the grid. Life was good. Our electricity bills plummeted, sometimes to less than $10 a month. Several neighbors expressed interest in the panels, asking about the installation process and cost savings. I was more than happy to share my experience, even offering to connect them with my installer who gave referral discounts. Everything was perfect until the annual HOA board elections. I did not pay much attention to the neighborhood politics at first. The previous board members seemed reasonable, focusing on maintaining common areas and organizing occasional community events. The annual meeting notice arrived in our mailbox, but I had a work conflict and could not attend. I later learned that meeting changed everything. A new HOA president had been elected, Margaret Wilkinson from 3 houses down. I had seen her around the neighborhood but never formally met her. She was in her 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair that never moved, even in the strongest wind. Her house was immaculate, with not a blade of grass out of place. In retrospect, I should have noticed how she would slow down when driving past our house, her eyes narrowing as she looked at our roof. As winter turned to spring, I decided to install a comprehensive security system. There had been reports of break-ins in nearby neighborhoods, and with both of us working long hours, the investment seemed prudent. The system included 8 high-definition cameras with night vision, covering every angle of our property, including the roof. The technician assured me the system would alert us to any unusual activity and store footage securely in the cloud. "Better safe than sorry," he said as he finished the installation. I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Within days of the security system installation, I received my first HOA violation notice. The letter, bearing Margaret's signature, claimed my solar panels violated the neighborhood aesthetic guidelines and demanded their removal within 30 days. I was baffled. The previous board had approved the installation, and I had followed every requirement to the letter. I immediately pulled out my approval documentation and reviewed the HOA bylaws, confirming what I already knew. My installation was fully compliant with both HOA rules and state laws that protected homeowners' rights to renewable energy. The next day, as I was watering my front garden, a shadow fell across the lawn. I looked up to see Margaret standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed tightly across her chest. This was our first real interaction, and it set the tone for everything that followed. "Those panels are an eyesore," she said without preamble, her voice carrying that distinctive note of someone accustomed to having their opinions treated as fact. "They are reducing property values throughout the neighborhood." I straightened, maintaining a calm demeanor despite my rising irritation. "Good morning, Margaret. I understand you have concerns, but my installation was fully approved by the previous board. I have all the documentation if you would like to see it. I gestured toward my house, offering to retrieve the paperwork. Her smile never reached her eyes as she replied, "The previous board was far too lenient with progressive modifications. As president, I have a responsibility to maintain the character of our community." I retrieved my approval documents and presented them, pointing to the signatures and date. Everything was done according to the rules. Additionally, state law protects homeowners' rights to install solar energy systems. Margaret barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. Rules can be reinterpreted. The Architectural Review Committee, which I now chair, has determined your installation does not meet our standards. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me holding the documents and feeling a distinct chill despite the spring sunshine. In the weeks that followed, the harassment intensified. I received violation notices for increasingly trivial issues: grass half an inch too tall, a garden hose visible from the street, trash cans left out 12 hours after collection. Each notice bore Margaret's signature and a smug reminder of potential fines. I addressed each complaint immediately while documenting everything, sensing this was building toward something bigger. My neighbors began to warn me about Margaret. One evening, Richard from next door came over with a bottle of wine and stories about Margaret's history of targeting homeowners she disliked. She forced the Johnsons to remove their basketball hoop because it was unsightly, he explained. And the Patels had to repaint their entire house because the shade of beige she approved in person suddenly did not match the official color code. The situation took an even darker turn when I discovered anonymous letters in several neighbors' mailboxes, complaining about the ugly solar panels ruining our beautiful neighborhood and asking them to pressure us into removal. The writing style was unmistakably Margaret's, the same odd capitalizations and distinctive phrasing from her official HOA communications. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against us. Despite the growing tension, I stood my ground. I responded to each violation notice with polite but firm references to the bylaws and relevant state laws. I kept copies of all communications and started recording our verbal interactions on my phone. Something told me I would need evidence of her harassment eventually. I just had no idea how soon that evidence would become crucial. My spouse and I had planned a weekend getaway to celebrate our anniversary, 2 days at a lakeside cabin about 3 hours away. We left early Friday morning, looking forward to disconnecting from the neighborhood drama. The weekend was peaceful, filled with hiking and stargazing, far from HOA politics. We returned Sunday evening, refreshed and relaxed, until we turned onto our street. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong with our roof. As we pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The solar panels that had been neatly arranged in rows were now a shattered mess. Glass fragments glittered in the setting sun. Several panels had been completely dislodged, hanging precariously from their mounting brackets. Wires had been ripped out and left dangling. The destruction was not random, it was methodical and deliberate. I stood in our driveway, staring up at the devastation, feeling a mixture of shock, rage, and helplessness wash over me. Thousands of dollars of damage lay before me, but more than that was the violation. Someone had climbed onto our roof, our home, with the express purpose of destruction. My hands shook as I called the police to report the vandalism. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They documented the damage, took photos, and asked if we had any idea who might be responsible. Without concrete evidence, I hesitated to directly accuse Margaret, but I did mention the ongoing conflict over the panels. The officers were sympathetic, but explained that without witnesses or evidence of the perpetrator, they could only file a report for insurance purposes. As the officers were preparing to leave, Margaret's silver SUV drove slowly past our house. Through the window, I could see her face, and the unmistakable smirk as she surveyed the damage. That expression confirmed what I already knew in my gut: she was responsible. The officers noticed my reaction and followed my gaze, but by then she had driven around the corner. "That is the HOA president I mentioned," I said. "The one who has been demanding I remove the panels." The officers exchanged glances but reminded me that suspicion was not evidence. They promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood but could not do much more without proof. As they drove away, I remembered the security system. the cameras we had installed just weeks before. With renewed hope, I rushed inside to access the footage. The security company had set up a user-friendly interface that allowed me to review footage from all 8 cameras. I focused on the roof cameras and rewound to Friday night, hours after we had left for our trip. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual appeared on the footage. Just as I was beginning to worry the cameras had malfunctioned, movement caught my eye. A figure in dark clothing appeared at the edge of our property around 1:30 a.m., cautiously looking around before approaching our fence. The night vision feature captured every detail with crystal clarity. There was no mistaking Margaret's face as she checked her surroundings once more before climbing over our fence with surprising agility for a woman her age. She carried what looked like a backpack, which I would later learn contained tools specifically brought to damage the panels. I watched my anger mounting as she used a ladder she had carried with her to access our roof. For the next 45 minutes, the footage showed Margaret methodically moving from panel to panel, sometimes smashing the glass with a hammer, other times disconnecting wiring or loosening mounting brackets. The audio captured her muttering to herself, phrases like teaching them a lesson, and see how they like this clearly audible in the night silence. When she finally climbed down and departed, she surveyed her handiwork with obvious satisfaction. The footage was so clear that it captured her smile as she gathered her tools and slipped back over the fence. It was irrefutable evidence. Margaret Wilkinson, HOA president, caught in the act of felony property destruction. With hands still trembling, but now from righteous indignation rather than helplessness, I copied the footage to a flash drive. This was no longer about solar panels or petty HOA violations. This was criminal behavior, and I now held the proof that would ensure justice. The next morning, I called my employer to request a few days off. This situation required my full attention. My first call was to a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. After describing the situation and mentioning the video evidence, he agreed to meet me that afternoon. Before heading to his office, I made copies of all prior communications with Margaret and the HOA, organizing them chronologically to establish the pattern of harassment leading up to the vandalism. Attorney James Harrington reviewed the evidence with growing interest. When I played the security footage, his professional demeanor momentarily slipped. "In 20 years of practice," he said, shaking his head, "I have rarely seen such clear evidence of malicious intent." He explained that Margaret had committed multiple violations: criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and potentially additional charges related to interfering with energy-generating equipment. In our state, he explained, there were strong solar access laws that specifically protected homeowners' rights to install renewable energy systems. What she did was not just petty vandalism, he said. Depending on the total damage, this could be felony-level property destruction. While the legal process began, I decided to gather more information about Margaret's history of HOA abuses. Discreetly, I reached out to neighbors who had experienced similar targeting. The stories poured in: families who had been harassed over trivial violations, homeowners who had been fined for questionable infractions, and several who had eventually sold their homes to escape the toxic environment Margaret had created. Most revealing were the conversations with former HOA board members. They described how Margaret had manipulated her way into leadership through intimidation and procedural technicalities, often scheduling important votes for times when her opponents could not attend. One former treasurer confided that he had resigned after Margaret had falsely accused him of financial impropriety, when he questioned her reallocation of HOA funds for beautification projects that somehow always benefited her immediate vicinity. As my allies grew in number, we created a comprehensive timeline of Margaret's escalating behavior. What began as my personal fight for justice was transforming into a community stand against years of unchecked bullying and abuse of power. I also connected with local environmental advocacy groups, who expressed interest in highlighting my case as an example of illegal obstruction of green energy adoption, offering additional legal resources and publicity if needed. Attorney Harrington advised me to present all evidence to the police again, now that we had clear identification of the perpetrator. This time, I met with a detective in the Property Crimes Division. Initially, he seemed to view this as yet another neighborhood dispute, his expression bored as I explained the background conflict over the solar panels. His demeanor changed dramatically when I played the security footage. His posture straightened, and he leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen as Margaret's clearly identifiable figure methodically destroyed my property. When the video ended, he immediately began taking detailed notes, asking pointed questions about dates, times, and previous interactions. "This is not a neighborhood spat," he said, his tone now serious. "This is felony property destruction, criminal trespassing, and potentially other charges. The district attorney will want to see this." 2 days later, I stood at my living room window and watched as 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of Margaret's house. The detective I had met with and a uniformed officer approached her front door with purposeful strides. Neighbors emerged from their homes, curious about the police presence in our usually quiet community. I could not hear the conversation, but I could see Margaret's face transform from confusion to indignation to shock as the detective presumably informed her of the charges. The officers escorted her to the police cruiser as she protested loudly, claiming this was all a misunderstanding, that she was being persecuted for doing her job as HOA president. Even as she was being placed in the back seat, she continued to proclaim her innocence, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her actions had been captured in high definition from multiple angles. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with text messages and calls from neighbors who had witnessed the scene. The charges against Margaret were severe: criminal trespassing, felony property destruction, and additional charges related to interfering with energy-generating equipment. The total damage to my solar system was estimated at over $15,000, well above the threshold for felony property destruction in our state. The story spread beyond our neighborhood when a local news station picked up the story, framing it as environmental vandalism in suburban America. They ran a segment featuring exterior shots of our damaged panels and an interview with my attorney, who spoke about the broader implications for homeowners' rights and renewable energy protection. That evening, I received an unexpected call from the district attorney's office. The assistant DA explained that they wanted to make an example of this case due to increasing incidents of solar panel vandalism nationwide. "Green energy adoption is a matter of public interest," she explained. "We want to send a clear message that this type of vandalism will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Margaret was released on bail the following day, with strict conditions including a restraining order that prohibited her from coming within 100 feet of our property or contacting us directly. This should have provided some relief, but instead, it merely shifted her tactics. Unable to target me directly due to the restraining order, Margaret began a smear campaign throughout the neighborhood and on community social media pages. She claimed the security footage had been manipulated and that I was framing her because of a personal vendetta against her leadership. She portrayed herself as a victim of technological trickery, suggesting that someone with computer skills had superimposed her face onto the body of the actual vandal. The accusations were absurd given the quality of the evidence, but that did not stop her from spreading false rumors about my character. According to Margaret, I was an eco-extremist trying to force my environmental agenda on the neighborhood, a troublemaker who refused to comply with reasonable HOA regulations, and even a fraudster attempting to scam insurance money by damaging my own property and blaming her. This period was emotionally draining. I found myself checking over my shoulder whenever I left the house, wondering if Margaret or one of her supporters might be watching. I installed additional security cameras and considered selling our dream home to escape the conflict. My spouse and I had lengthy discussions about whether staying was worth the ongoing stress and anxiety. Just as I was reaching my breaking point, an unexpected development shifted the momentum. Margaret's closest allies in the neighborhood began distancing themselves from her. The initial shock of her arrest had worn off, and many had viewed the security footage, which my attorney had made available to the HOA board as part of the ongoing investigation. The evidence was simply too clear to deny. Former allies approached me with their own stories of Margaret's intimidation tactics. Mrs. Chen from down the street revealed that Margaret had threatened to report her home-based bakery business to county authorities if she did not support Margaret's agenda at HOA meetings. The Rodriguezes confided that Margaret had blocked approval of their backyard landscaping project until they agreed to vote against solar installations in common areas. The neighborhood's silent majority, long cowed by Margaret's aggressive tactics, finally found the courage to speak out. A petition began circulating, calling for a special HOA meeting to address the situation and consider removing Margaret from her position as president. The petition gathered signatures quickly, including many who had previously been too intimidated to challenge her authority. The special meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at the community center. The attendance was unprecedented, nearly 80% of homeowners present, compared to the usual 15 or 20% at regular meetings. The atmosphere was tense as the vice president called the meeting to order, explaining the serious nature of the situation and the purpose of the gathering. The meeting began with a formal presentation of the evidence against Margaret, including selected portions of the security footage and a timeline of her documented harassment. As the images played on the projector screen, a collective gasp filled the room. Even those who had heard about the footage were unprepared for the clarity with which it showed Margaret's deliberate actions. The floor was then opened for community comments. What followed was a cathartic outpouring as neighbor after neighbor stepped forward to share their own experiences with Margaret's reign of terror. Stories spanning years emerged: arbitrary rule enforcement, personal vendettas, manipulated elections, and selective application of bylaws. Some homeowners became emotional as they described the stress and financial hardship her actions had caused them. Margaret sat stone-faced through most of the testimonies, occasionally shaking her head or attempting to interject, only to be reminded by the vice president that she would have her opportunity to speak. When her turn finally came, her defense fell flat. She spoke of her dedication to the community and maintaining property values, but her words rang hollow against the mountain of evidence and testimony. The vote to remove her from the HOA presidency was unanimous, a first in the neighborhood's history. I will never forget the expression on Margaret's face as the result was announced. The moment she realized her social power structure had completely collapsed, leaving her truly alone for the first time since she had clawed her way to power. Her face flushed crimson, then drained of all color as she gathered her belongings and left the community center without another word, no supporters rising to follow her. With the HOA matter resolved, the focus shifted to the criminal proceedings. The court date was set for the following month. My attorney advised me to prepare for a potentially uncomfortable experience, as I would need to testify about the harassment leading up to the vandalism. We spent several hours rehearsing potential questions and reviewing the chronology of events to ensure my testimony would be clear and consistent. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination as I took my seat in the courtroom. Margaret sat at the defense table with her attorney, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. She had made an effort to appear respectable and harmless. Subtle makeup, conservative clothing, her usual perfect hair softened into a more approachable style. It was a calculated attempt to present herself as the reasonable HOA president, rather than the vindictive vandal captured on video. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, establishing the pattern of harassment through my documented communications with Margaret and the HOA. When it came time to present the security footage, the courtroom fell silent. The video was displayed on monitors visible to the judge, jury, and gallery. Frame by frame, Margaret's actions were revealed in unforgiving detail. Her cautious approach to our property, the tools she brought specifically for destruction, and her satisfied expression as she surveyed the damage before departing. Margaret's defense attempted to portray her as a concerned HOA president protecting property values, arguing that she had been under extreme stress due to her responsibilities and had exercised poor judgment. This strategy crumbled during cross-examination when the prosecutor asked the simple but devastating question, "Ms. Wilkinson, can you please explain how trespassing onto someone's property in the middle of the night and destroying their solar panels falls within the scope of HOA authority. Her attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen her expression in the video, not stress or poor judgment, but calculated malice. In a surprising twist, the prosecution called two witnesses I had not expected, former residents of previous neighborhoods where Margaret had lived. They described similar patterns of behavior spanning years, including an incident where she had damaged a neighbor's prized rose garden after losing a community beautification contest to them. This established that her actions were not an isolated incident, but part of a long-standing pattern of retaliatory behavior. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge delivered a scathing assessment before announcing the sentence: full financial restitution for the damaged solar system, 200 hours of community service, specifically with environmental organizations, 3 years of probation, and a permanent injunction barring her from serving on any HOA board or similar position of authority. Most satisfying was the judge's requirement that Margaret offer a public apology in court and acknowledge that her actions were unlawful. She stood stiffly at the podium, reading from a prepared statement that her attorney had likely written, her voice flat and emotionless. Though the words expressed remorse, her body language conveyed only resentment at being caught and punished. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been exhausting, emotionally, financially, and physically, but standing up to a bully had been worth every moment. I reflected on how easily Margaret might have continued her reign of terror if not for the security system I had installed just in time. Sometimes the universe has a way of providing exactly what we need, precisely when we need it most. In the months that followed the trial, our neighborhood underwent a remarkable transformation. The new HOA board, led by Richard from next door, implemented sweeping changes to the bylaws, explicitly protecting homeowners' rights to renewable energy installations. I was invited to help draft the language, ensuring that future residents would never face the harassment I had endured. My solar panels were not only replaced, but upgraded through the insurance settlement and additional compensation from the lawsuit. The new system generated even more power, further reducing our environmental footprint. More importantly, it stood as a visible symbol of victory over intimidation and abuse of power. Inspired by our perseverance, several neighbors installed their own solar systems, creating a mini-green revolution in our community. Within a year, nearly 20% of homes in Oak Ridge estates boasted solar panels, making our neighborhood one of the most energy efficient in the county. The local paper even ran a feature story on our community's transformation, interviewing me about the court case and its aftermath. The relationships formed during the conflict evolved into genuine friendships. The neighbors who had stood beside me through the ordeal became close friends, with regular dinner gatherings and community events. The following spring, we organized the neighborhood's first sustainability fair, showcasing various eco-friendly home improvements and offering information about renewable energy options. The event was so successful that it became an annual tradition, drawing visitors from surrounding communities. Margaret listed her house for sale 3 months after the trial. She moved away quietly, leaving no forwarding address. I sometimes wondered if she had learned anything from the experience or if she was simply seeking a new community where her reputation had not preceded her. Either way, our neighborhood was healing from the toxic environment she had created. As for me, the experience changed me in ways I had not anticipated. I became more active in local politics, advocating for stronger legal protections for homeowners and renewable energy systems. I spoke at city council meetings about the importance of balancing HOA authority with individual property rights. My story resonated with many who had experienced similar conflicts, and together, we pushed for legislative changes at the state level. On quiet evenings, I often sit on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset reflect off my solar panels. There is something deeply satisfying about generating clean energy while enjoying the peace and community we fought so hard to preserve. Our home truly feels like the dream we had envisioned when we first moved in, perhaps even more so for having defended it. I learned that sometimes fighting back against injustice creates ripples that benefit many beyond yourself. What began as a personal conflict over solar panels ultimately led to positive changes for an entire community. And whenever I see new solar installations appearing on rooftops throughout our neighborhood, I am reminded that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, can create lasting change. Sometimes, the best revenge is not just winning your battle, but inspiring others to fight for their rights as well. And that victory shines brighter than any solar panel ever could.